Hello and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast about the intersection of culture and commerce. I'm Phillip, and today we have back with us friend of the show, VP of Content at Retail Touchpoints, Alicia Esposito. Welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me. I am so excited to be here.
Yeah, so am I. It's this is our celebration of all things Barbie. This episode on release day. If you're watching the YouTube, you can see Sunday Funday shirt. Alicia, you're sporting your Barbie t-shirt. I have the only pink t-shirt that I had in my closet, but it is extremely pink.
It is very pink. That's 80s era Barbie.
This is 80s
Step
era
dance
Barbie.
Instructor Barbie.
This is the Spark rollerblade Barbie sort of pink. You know what I'm talking about? Neon colors.
Yep,
we'll get into that. I'm sure that you are, if you've been listening to podcasts, especially on what I'm guessing today is going to be the global release of the Barbie movie, you're probably sick of hearing, like, we have had Barbie crammed down our throats for about a month already. So, but we haven't talked about it on Future Commerce. There's a lot to talk about. But before we get into all of that, we did just kind of wrap up Rice, Alicia. I thought maybe we could give like a 2-minute overview of that show, and maybe you can just catch us up on what you're going to be working on here coming into the summer and fall.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, Phillip, we just wrapped up the Retail Innovation Conference and Expo. I think anytime you do events, it's a big learning experience, especially in retail, because the dynamics of the industry are always changing so much. Issues that were top of mind 6 months ago are sometimes not as relevant or are deprioritized, especially in the current climate. So it was really interesting just to see where people were going, where their priorities were. And I think the one thing that just kept coming up is the role that culture plays in all of our decisions. And I know obviously this is your bread and butter here at Future Commerce, but I think we're seeing it more and more pronounced. And we had quite a few sessions, I think, in some capacity that either indirectly kind of alluded to that fact, or, it was the main focus of the sessions themselves. So I think that's one thing that's really excited for me as someone who studies retail every day, reports on retail, but is also a very big culture nerd. Like, I love pop culture. I think it's, a huge representation of who we are as individuals, as society. And I'm always just like a big fan of just doing my own little media analysis of what's happening in the world. So I think it's just very interesting to see how the worlds are blurring together now.
And it's so true, Alicia. What you just said is that the culture, there's like cultural acceptance of certain types of media and popular media that shapes the way that we perceive the world. And that's, I think we went through maybe 10, 15 years of sort of comic book fandom, right? A science fiction fandom that guided a lot of the cultural conversation, representation also of those, like in those franchises, using those as platforms to have larger cultural conversations too. And there is nothing that's more relevant in that conversation than the shift that and the investment that Mattel and the Barbie brand have made over the last 15 years to also modernize that brand. And this is the thing I think is often lost. Something that I heard come through in Rice sessions on more than one occasion is that what makes a brand? A brand is not a logo or fonts or colors. A brand is a marker of trust of a corporation that was able to endure despite all odds. And that means that you have to remain culturally relevant, and brands pass away when the culture doesn't accept them. And you can only talk about Barbie in 2023 if the brand has adapted to the times. That's kind of what we're seeing across the board, right? So, and even with e-commerce to some degree, which I know retail tech is sort of your beat. The way that that the ecosystem of e-commerce or retail has changed dramatically is like we as operators kind of need to get with the times too, and have different types of conversations. So, any other thoughts about that before we shift gears?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I would add, I think your point about, modernization is really spot on, because there's something to be said about brand recall and like having that strong association. Like I'm thinking about like, say, the, you know, Barbie profile silhouette. Like if people see like the outline of like the little flippy ponytail, they're like, oh yeah, Barbie. Like that's association. But relevance and true brand loyalty ties to a brand's ability to keep the core of like what people initially love about a brand or, you know, a person, but also be able to adapt to some of the new realities of the consumer, but
Yes.
also accept some of the pitfalls or problematic nature of the past of the brand, right? And being able to just accept it, acknowledge it, and say, okay, well, how do we move on from here, knowing what we know now, given the current context? And I think that's the one thing that people lose sight of, right? Like, it's not like this should cease to exist. It's like, okay, that happened. That's what it was. But like, how do we move on from here? And I think that can apply to all brands, probably.
I think so. That is, I think, the metatextual conversation is that all brands could learn something from this moment, not in the marketing push behind Barbie as a brand, but the fact that there was anything to push whatsoever, given that the way the way that I think most people have perceived the Barbie brand has been one of sort of like that lives in antiquity or has some outmoded, you know, has a perception of being outmoded or outdated. But I have two young daughters, and for the last 12 years in my house, you know, I don't know if you realize this, like every 3 weeks there's a new like Barbie and her sisters go on some puppy road trip adventure video that drops on Netflix. Like
the IP is insane.
It is so deep, and it's perpetual. Like that's the thing I think people have missed. If you're like an elder millennial and you don't have young children, this is an enduring brand and has a very deep, like, has its own like cinematic
deep
universe
roots
already, especially in animation. So if the last time you saw Barbie was in like Toy Story 2 or Toy Story 3, and sort of that sort of self-aware, cheeky nature, I think that the live action, you know, film, the Greta Gerwig piece that's coming out is going to be, you know, I can't wait to see it because there's so much to unpack about its own self-awareness. But and you just saw was it a documentary about sort of the history of Barbie's thought, or the Mattel's company's process of this? What was that all about?
Yeah. So it's called Tiny Shoulders. It is not a new documentary. So that came out in 2018. And it just like gave me this like nice aha moment. So watching the trailer for the Barbie movie, hearing more about what it was about, and honestly, the fact that Greta Gerwig was directing it, I was like, oh, okay, all right, you know, I'm in it. Let me see what it's about. But it just like created this aha moment for me because this documentary, Tiny Shoulders, kind of speaks to, I think, the complex relationship that a lot of us have with Barbie. And I say this as someone, you know, who grew up in the 90s, like the resurgence, I think, could be considered for the Barbie brand. Because on one side, you know, it's talking about that complex, you know, relationship, the fact that, you know, there were some problematic facets around, you know, how Barbie created these unrealistic standards for beauty and like what women should be. But at the same time, Barbie was president, you know, Barbie went to space, Barbie did all of this. And then simultaneously, like the parallel plot was the Barbie team rethinking or building out the next phase of the Barbie brand. And that included, you know, what role does diversity and inclusion play in all of this? And I know when people hear diversity and inclusion, it's like, ugh, okay, like what does that mean? So I saw some stats. Now Barbie products or Barbie dolls have 35 different skin tones, 97 different hairstyles, and that includes, you know, different textures, and 9 different body types. So the documentary kind of walks through that process and includes the perspectives of people who work for Mattel and work for Barbie and their own complex feelings about the brand. It's not just like, oh, I love Barbie, you know, she's perfect and wonderful. It's like one of the team members was like, I'm a feminist. Like I have all these feminist friends. I'm like, how are you working for this brand? And she's like, because I want to change it. I want to improve it. I want to make it better. So I thought it was a really nice summation, I think, of people who just really love to understand the history of these products and how far they've come, the role they play in our culture.
Yeah.
And also the work that really needs to be done to create positive change, not just around the product itself, but how it goes to market, how consumers perceive it, and ultimately set new standards for product creation in the future. And I think the movie kind of gives a subtle nod to that realization and that complexity that we've been feeling for a long time. And in a way kind of makes Barbie feel that, right? Like, oh, like what is real life? You know, like,
right.
It's very meta.
But what it is extremely meta. And that's where, so there's this, something we've written about on a few occasions on our, Future Commerce Insiders column is this emergent, study in psychology of this emergent metatextual, like meta state of media, where modern audiences, especially younger audiences, want the media that they consume and the brands that they consume to be speaking to them about the strange nature that they like. There has to be some self-awareness in the way that they speak to their audience. I could give you a million examples. One that's really fresh in my mind is I went to take my kids to see Elemental recently, which is a Pixar film. It's in theaters right now if you're listening to this, which is like middle of July in 2023. And it's a fine movie. It's not top tier Pixar. But what I couldn't help but notice is there are moments where the movie pauses to make a critique of itself, to say, well, isn't this such a strange thing we're all doing right now, that we're elements like living in this world? And at one point, like the fire people and the water people have to like get around a fence, and the fire guy just walks through the fence and the water guy just walks through the fence, and he's like, isn't it weird that we even have a fence? Like, who's that fence for?
Existential crisis within cartoons, right?
Yeah, and this speaks to this idea of meta modernist storytelling, where we're not just telling a story, we're also giving subtext about the self-awareness that the story exists at a certain time for a certain set of people. And we're also speaking to them about the thing we're doing. Oh, we're sitting in a dark theater like right now. And I think that's what the intention is of the Barbie marketing machine, is to also speak to, you cannot do a Barbie movie without basically, firebombing every single type of, without basically also making a critique of the pervasiveness of the brand by going overboard with brand. Right. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the way that that's played out. Are you sick of Barbie yet, Alicia?
No, I love it. I think it's so fun. I'm also like one of those big nostalgia nerds. Like I'll go to like the camp site, like for people who don't know, camp is a toy retailer, or I'll go to their store and just look at all the old toys that they have from like when I was a kid. Like I love it. And I also just love the thought and the creativity behind a lot of these partnerships and the intention. Like I'm like, oh, like there's storytelling within this story. And I just really like to break all of that down and just understand, what it's all about. So
the Barbie, so I have to believe at this point that there's something to the tune of 100 plus collabs that have happened across consumer brands, entertainment, travel, themed hotel rooms, Airbnbs. There's like a literal Barbie dream house. What's your favorite, one or two that you kind of stick out to you, and what is it about it that appeals to you?
Okay. So I'm going to try and break these down into categories because, I just like to compartmentalize things. That's how I process. I'm a control freak. In general, I'm just a big fan of like any sort of hospitality collab. I think retail in general has a really big opportunity to not just learn from hospitality, but also kind of bring those synergies together to create a better customer experience. I've written about it a lot. So Airbnb, I think, has always risen to the occasion around these big brand moments and cultural phenomena. Like we were talking before we started about, the Bluey house that like people could rent for a little bit. They rented out Carrie Bradshaw's apartment, like tweaked that before, and just like that came out. And I think, they're a really great example of a brand that doesn't necessarily have ties to like the commercial product world, but really turns it into a commercial product moment. So I think right off the bat, I love them. Forever 21, I think, is doing some incredible work around brand licensing in general. So like as a brand strategy, especially because we're in this like 90s and Y2K nostalgia moment. They just have like brought the right brands. And I'm not just talking about Barbie, right? Like I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about like toy products, like anything recognizable, they've managed to bring it in, but they've really blown this line out of the water. And I really found it interesting. I was looking through this one Twitter thread of like all the different collabs. And what I found really interesting is the number of higher price, like almost pseudo like luxury brands that are hopping on this bandwagon. Like there is glassware, there is like Ruggable has a collab with them. And I think it really speaks to, it's like that little tongue-in-cheek nod to like the people probably like in our age range that like also like grew up with Barbie and, has a bit more spend on tap for discretionary spending. And, who doesn't love a good collab, right? And knowing that it's like for this time and like for this moment, I think, I think I do like the Ruggable line a lot. So
I thought the Ruggable collab was one of my favorite ones as well, in that it looks like a piece that you may have wanted to have in your home anyway, outside of the Barbie tie-in.
Yeah.
Right. It's extremely subtle. And I think that there's, for what it's worth, to kind of tie it back to the way that we break out of cycles where there are large cultural moments that shift our tastes. And I could not have predicted hot pink coming back. The way that those big moments happen, there's sort of these big resets where you can't really iterate your way, right? Small changes over time. You really don't innovate your way to large, big changes in taste. And that is the thing that has happened here, is that because the collaborations have been so pervasive, the color palettes have shifted dramatically, and we'll begin a new iteration cycle again after this. And the nostalgia fuel is very strong, but Barbie has so many eras, right? And so I can't think of any better vehicle for this moment. So a theme of our visions report this year that runs through all of the 4 trends is that nostalgia is fueling a lot of the consumer demand and desire at the moment. And so we're, as brands, you're sort of like naturally playing into that. It's not just in the products that you buy or their aesthetics. It's also in that I think everybody, we've sort of maybe reached a point where you can have, to your point, Alicia, if you have the means, you can have whatever you didn't have as a child, right? Or have the aesthetic of that thing that you wanted, and sort of treat that inner child that you have, which I think we all need to take care of ourselves a little bit to that degree. So yeah, it's not just the dream house. It's sort of Malibu Barbie too. So what an interesting thing to play out right now. What are some ones that you think maybe, I don't know, I don't want to be critical, but man, miss the mark a little bit, maybe feel a little bit about the jumping on the bandwagon a little too much. Maybe I'll say there's a big push from the Etsy sellers in the world that are kind of making the Barbenheimer sort of thing happen.
I did get retargeted a Barbenheimer t-shirt today. I almost bought it. just to have it.
For those who aren't familiar, Oppenheimer, which is the Christopher Nolan movie, is coming out same day and date. There's the film Twitter is in a panic because the Barbie team are like very specifically trying to compete in a way that has never happened before. In fact, I feel like I heard they moved their screening dates to compete day and date with the screening dates for critics against Oppenheimer.
Wow.
Very punchy.
The beef runs deep with Christopher Nolan. Who knew?
Very, very bold decision. Let's see how it plays out for him, Cotton. I think the making Barbenheimer and sort of like pitting these two properties against each other, or making a critique about how polar opposite they are, and turning it into a double feature, is also extremely modern. But the merchification of it all feels like it's trying a little too hard. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, see, that's interesting. I almost thought that whole thing was more of just like a meme that like people were running with. And what I found most interesting about it was that it kind of spoke to the reality, I think, of our tastes. Like, I think a lot of the people who will be seeing the Barbie movie will likely also see Oppenheimer. Like, yeah. I think, and like maybe I'm just speaking for myself and my personal behaviors. And I think it just like
gonna see both.
Speaks to like how, you know, we can say, yeah, I'm going to go see the Barbie movie, but I can also appreciate the fine filmmaking of Christopher Nolan and acting abilities of Cillian Murphy. Like there's less, what's the word I'm looking for? There's less snobbery, I feel like. And I think that kind of helps break down the lines a little bit and shows how multidimensional we are as consumers. Like it's not so cut and dry anymore. And I thought it was cute. I thought it was cheeky. But I'm
weekend,
probably not going to buy the t-shirt.
Probably not worth buying the t-shirt. Although, you know, if you did turn up to the theater to see the double feature, having the t-shirt's probably not a bad idea. This weekend I saw a movie about one of the most monumental achievements in human history, combining multiple disciplines across many areas of the economy, sectors, and industries, all concerted for one monolithic human achievement. And I left the theater absolutely devastated to my core about the fear-inducing awe of what mankind is capable of. But enough about the movie Oppenheimer. Barbie was awesome. But there's, you know, that's the kind of thing that I think that you could probably have the same sort of discourse about both.
Right.
Which makes it all the more interesting for everyone to participate in. Everybody kind of wants to put their own stamp on it because it feels so personal. Can you think of another brand that is like that? And for me, I feel invested in Barbie for some reason because I grew up playing Barbies with my kid sister, right? And even I have some emotional investment and nostalgia around the brand, which I think says a lot.
I think that's it. It's an investment, right? Like even in those instances where we had that phase where like, Barbie sucks. Like Barbie represents, you know, the awful expectations that they have for women. Yeah, like I mean, I've gone through that, you know, personally, but I think there is, because Barbie has been so present through all of these decades and through all of these changes. I think we all have a little bit of emotional investment in it. And like, not for nothing, I don't know if this is too much of a throwback, but I feel like the movie Life Size walked so the Barbie movie could run. So do you remember Life Size with Tyra
I do
Banks?
remember Life Size. I remember.
Yeah. It was
Tyra
like that
Banks
first little glimpse of like a fashion like doll, like dealing with relevance, dealing with life, like young Lindsay Lohan, what could be better? But it kind of had that moment of like that, like, oh, like we all have these moments of realization and moments of growth, and it seems like it's on that similar path. But I think you nailed it, Phillip. I think it's a brand that we, like it or not, we do have some sort of stake in the game. And like, if this is a win, it's like, yeah, like, you know, good for them. But to your point around like what other brand has this type of recognition, I think Lego has done a really good job.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I was listening to a really interesting podcast. So my husband's like a big movie buff, and I heard them talking about the Barbie movie. And apparently Mattel is like doubling down on like courting these filmmakers,
Oh
and
yeah.
basically saying like, here's the toy chest, so to speak. Like, what resonates? Like, what can we do with this? I think
Yeah.
even like J.J. Abrams was like brought into the mix, so who knows
Oh
what
yeah.
happens there.
We're gonna get it all. We're gonna get the Bob the Builder verse. We're gonna have the, you know, it's I saw to that point. It's like nothing is off the table.
Right?
There's,
No,
you know, the like My Little Tool Chest, you know, Fisher Price. It's all, yeah.
The creative IP discussion, I think, is like probably a whole other hour podcast. But they talked about like, okay, this is great, you know, having this brand recall and this nostalgia, like it does create a new vehicle for filmmakers like Greta Gerwig to kind of tap into the mainstream market, and tell a really powerful story. But then it kind of goes down this rabbit hole of, okay, but like if all of the funds are going towards these things and these big corporations that have all of the IP already and selling all of the products, what does that leave for like new stories? So that's probably, you know, again, a whole adjacent conversation. But I think it's a really interesting time around storytelling and how do you tap into the essence of nostalgia, tell a fun story that draws people to the theaters, but also kind of bring something new into the mix. But again, jury's still out because I haven't seen the movie. But I hope it kind of gets a little bit deeper into that. It seems like it will.
Well, I think it will too. And you know, so at the Vision Summit at Rice, we had a guest speaker who opened the show. His name is Ruby Justice Thoreau, and he describes himself as a cyber ethnographer, artist and an activist, and a wonderful writer. He published a piece recently in a column called "The End Times," which I thought it's in a property called Byline, and you know, sort of positioning this idea of the opening scene of the Barbie trailer being a send up of the 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you know, you see the way he wrote it. Nobody can reproduce this, so I'll just read it to you. A barren, rocky landscape at dawn. Two vast legs of plastic stand in the desert. Near them, a group of young girls playing with baby dolls approaches and stares in awe. They abandon their pretend babies, smashing them to pieces, and embrace the monolith, a stylish, slender woman in aspiration, our new idol, Barbie. And, you know, it's true, though, that to understand the director's intent of that scene is to draw on sort of transmedia literacy. It is that Barbie represented a shift of the idea of children's playthings and culture, but also represented a new monolith, a new way to see and perceive the world through this, you know, this artifice of fashion, desirability, idealistic standards. And you know, Ruby's whole thing is sort of this idea of the tyranny of images and how imagery shapes our perceptions, shapes culture, sure, but shapes us. And specifically what we buy and where we buy it. And I find that to be a fascinating choice here, to your point, that that they have recreated a monolith a la, you know, this 2001 Space Odyssey send up. They're recreating a monolith in the marketing machine. It is its own Manhattan Project, to come back to sort of the Oppenheimer approach. Yeah.
Well, and what I find interesting too, like to that point around perception and the elevation of the brand. I mean, what is happening within the fashion world around even just like the pink carpet looks and Margot Robbie, like the recreation of like these core Barbie fashions. It really transforms, I think, the brand perception of like, okay, this is just a consumer product for kids to, again, the people who loved Barbie growing up. Probably a lot of the designers recreating these looks loved Barbie growing up. and they're turning it into something new. And in some cases, a little bit of like a copy and paste type recreation, but other times it's like a modernized approach to, you know, a fashion moment that represents, again, it has such strong ties to Barbie. So it's like that nice full circle moment of like, oh, like we're seeing this moment like that we had like in our little toy trunks growing up, and it's like literally life size, and like it's here. And I don't know, it's just like a nice little moment, I think, and it shows how it's kind of gotten elevated a little bit.
Elevated for sure, and I think it is profoundly modern. You said life size again. It reminded me that life size. So the film that you referenced is not high on Google SERP. But what is an omni-channel contact center with video conferencing solutions called Life Size. So if that doesn't tell you,
wow,
that exists,
we ended up there, and I didn't expect it.
Who knew? That's just sort of. It either speaks to us being out of the names of software, or it's all connected, Alicia. It's all connected.
It's a great circle of life. And also Life Size 2 is about a troubled female toy executive who has issues with what the doll represents in modern society.
Christina Garnett, who actually is great on Twitter, great follow, but she I think she works at HubSpot, very media literate, and she sort of mused about this concern that brands will learn the wrong message from the marketing machine of Barbie. And that the message we will learn is what people want is to create a moment, right? Or to create an event out of all childhood toy properties.
Yep.
And
that was like that movie point, yeah.
Right. And that is, I think the fear here is we're going to learn the wrong lesson, and we're not going to be able to help ourselves in the way that we are trying to quote unquote world build. What is the dark future here is that we're going to have to deal with, I already see, the Star Wars cookbook at,
or we just go down rabbit holes that don't make sense.
We already have IP, to death.
Yeah.
What are some thinking, what's your thinking around there? What wouldn't you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I would never want to see the IP get so entrenched and like have that just be the only inroad for new content creation and like new media creation. I think there's a space for that, but when it completely takes away from the new ideas, the new storytelling, the point I mentioned earlier about like them trying to court filmmakers, it's like, okay, well, they have the deep pockets, so what does that mean for the unheard voices and the new voices that are trying to tell more profound stories and more impactful stories? Because if, Greta Gerwig and like similar filmmakers can make that money and get on a path to progression towards like these big blockbusters,
right?
Where does that allocation go? I mean, I guess in terms of filmmaking and talent, I guess same thing goes for product development, right? Like, what does that mean for the designers and, the product developers that want to be a part of, a new business or a new brand? Maybe they'll just end up trying to work for like a Mattel because that's where they know like the IP money is and there's security there and longevity there. I mean, I think there are implications either way, but I don't know. What do you think?
I think that were more. When I think of certain brands, Stance, the sock company, is a good example. Funko is another. These are blank canvases which exist just for licensing.
Yeah, and fandom. Yeah.
Right. The thing that makes those brands valuable is the understanding of how to forge partnerships and do licensing. We might need to divide all of history into like the time before the Barbie movie and the time after the Barbie movie.
A media and marketing analysis post Barbie. Yeah.
Because I do think that this might be like you know, a nuclear level event where every company decides that it needs to pursue licensing as a
Hmm.
core part of its business model. And I don't know that I think that's the wrong lesson to learn here. There are
Hmm.
certain brands or certain companies and products that exist, and there's only a few of them in the world that you can think of and reference where licensing is the business.
Hmm.
There's a few companies that exist where licensing can be a small part of the business. And then there's everything else in the world that has now been co-opted to be part of one media moment. And
Yeah.
I'm a little bit concerned that we will manufacture more of those. Um, some news that came out today, for instance, is Bob Iger and Disney are going to sort of ratchet back their investment in Star Wars and Marvel.
Hmm.
And well, there's we have plenty of things now coming down the pike to take their place in popular culture. Um, Especially when you look at like Super Mario and a potential and the success of that film, the potential like Legend of Zelda, the other Nintendo franchises. It just kind of feels like we're living in a lot of deja vu.
Hmm.
And yeah, so but what I will say is it's been profoundly not boring.
Oh yeah.
And I am so happy to not be bored because I've been profoundly bored
Right.
with the way that brands and the unimaginative nature of brands and the unimaginative nature of the channel, not just what you buy, but where you buy it.
Yeah. It's fun seeing where the brand shows up. Like, I was actually looking into like how they have a partnership with Bumble, and I'm like, oh, how does that work?
Yeah.
I was like, let me look into that. I want to see what that's all about. So, I mean, it's an unexpected, vehicle
Yes.
for sure. But, to your point, it makes me wonder too whether that kind of is an indicator of like, oh, let's just like do it because everybody else is doing it. Like a lot of that happens with like social media trends, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
everybody else is doing this meme, so we gotta do that. We gotta do that too, and like turn it into something like, um, you know, like social media managers going off the deep end and like posting really weird stuff like became a thing for a while because of Duolingo. Like now everybody's doing it. I'm like, all right, well now it's not like funny or weird anymore. Like it's just kind of like
Exactly.
annoying.
It's the wrong
So
lesson to learn. I get,
yeah.
yeah, that's a better example of the kind of thing that I would be a little bit concerned about. Maybe we could delve into some theories about the nature of the Barbie film. What are you expecting? I mean, neither of us have seen it. I'm taking it, right?
Yeah, no, I haven't.
And
I
people
don't
are
have any
listening to this
connections there. I wish
on
I
the day of
did.
neither do I. Um, do you think that we're going to see explicit brand tie-ins in the film itself
I feel
because of the nature of the marketing?
I feel like we have to. Only because like a lot of the Barbie dolls of the past did have product tie-ins. Like there was like McDonald's Barbie and like do
Right.
you remember that? Like there were always like some subtle or like direct brand partnerships there. So I think it has to be some fun little like tongue-in-cheek again meta moment of like, oh, Barbie like always had these brand partnerships and now the marketing and like I don't know. I'm curious to see. I think I'm gonna do a count
Mm,
just to see what shows up. Like what will be subtle versus what will be very direct. Like Crocs is another one. Crocs is very good at collabs. So like
for
if there were
sure.
like a few Barbies that like have or a few different characters that have like Crocs on, like that's going to be like a very direct because like who can miss Crocs? Like really, I love them. I've been converted, but like you can't miss them. So
There's a I think we're going to see a lot of cameos, both on,
mm-hmm.
from not just from, the celebrity perspective, but I think that the brand, the sort of commercialization of the film, I think that the marketing is like foreshadowing to the nature of the film, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, and I cannot wait for all of the analysis that will follow of the film itself. Another movie I'm extremely excited about this summer is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part One. Um,
Yes.
I'm catching up, so I'm rewatching all of the Mission Impossible films. Couldn't help but last night we were watching Mission Impossible 2, which is by far the worst film in the franchise. But that film is packed with explicit product placement. It's so distracting.
It's like a Wayne's World moment.
It is.
Oh, my head.
Which is also very like meta-modernist in its critique of brand. I think that that's a really interesting thing. In fact, I noticed it right at the beginning of the film. There's the Oakley glasses that blow up. There's like a Bulgari necklace. There's a character that mentions, "Don't step on my Gucci shoes." My $800 Gucci shoes, which, you know, in 1998 was, now I think $800 would be a steal for some Gucci leather loafers. So I was like, there must be somebody who's written about this. Don't make me have to write the think piece about Mission Impossible 2 in 2023. And there's a number of critical pieces, but the number one SEO ranked rundown of commercialism is apparently a sort of a family like safety magazine online called Plugged In, and Plugged In does a sort of like, is this safe for kids sort of analysis of films.
Got it.
And I found it fascinating. It's not just a breakdown of violence or sexuality or themes that, you know, might be like characters in peril, or themes that might be confusing, or, you know, or too verging on adult for children. They explicitly break out in most of their critical analysis commercialism.
Oh, interesting.
I've never known that before, and it's going to be a resource for me now, is like how much commercialism in this film. It ranks extraordinarily high. And so that's where I think that there's going to be a big... our producer Eric is breaking in to say, yeah, Twilight is also fascinated with Volvo as a brand. Marvel
very unlikely sponsor.
With Audi and Acura. I think that's where it is normalized now. It's not as in your face as it used to be. I hope it's over the top for Barbie, because I really want something to talk about after this movie comes out.
I feel like I think it makes sense though, because like Barbie is like naturally very kitschy, and I think it would just be more of, hopefully it's more of like a lever for like the humor and like the little like wink moment.
Yes.
You know? Versus versus the Mission Impossible, which like I'm sure there was some sort of like advertising life cycle that happened. So like beforehand, like it was like, you know, the Gucci ads, or, you know, the Oakley ads, like starring. Yeah. So I mean, and then it just like dies off. Once the film is out or out of theaters, it's like it's done. So
could be. There's
we'll
also this you know, there's a lot of fan theories about what the nature of the movie will be and what the movie is trying to say. None of that's really apparent in the marketing. It does look like in the spoiler alert for people that avoid trailers, but there is a point when you know, when we see Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling as Ken. So they go to the real world.
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling, by the way, let's just call him Baby Goose from now on. But you know, it looks like they go to the real world, which I think is, again, in films of this era made for us based on IP that's from our childhood. The Lego movie is another good example of that, right? Toy Story does this a lot. It's like, what are the implications, and being able to make a critique about the way that, you know, that these things inhabit our real world, and the things like how the dissonance of those characters existing in this real world, and then but them being sentient, and how horrific that would actually be to be a child's plaything. I love going deep down that rabbit hole. Do you have like a group of friends, Alicia, that you can do this with, or is it just us on the podcast? Okay.
Oh yeah. No, we go deep. It's usually in text chains, and then we co-watch it, and then we go back to it when we see each other in person. Yeah.
You have to revisit it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure that we'll need to do a bit of a regroup on it when it does happen.
Or we can do like a live tweet or like a live threads
We should
Threading.
just
We
buy
can
out the
thread
whole
it up.
theater. That's the Henry moment, is like just buying out the whole theater for your own sort of like Rocky Horror Picture Show-esque,
Yes.
event.
Or rent out Barbie's dream house and watch Barbie while you're living like Barbie.
In your high heel Barbie Crocs, probably.
And your hot pink shirt.
I love it. Thank you so much. Alicia Esposito from Retail Touchpoints. Thank you for coming on Future Commerce. Where can people find you online? Where should they be paying attention to the things you write?
Retailtouchpoints.com or LinkedIn, Alicia Esposito, Retail Touchpoints. And I'm threading. Is that what they call it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alicia Vio Espo.
Alicia Esposito. Thank you. This has been great.
Thank you.
I love nerding out about. I'm glad Brian wasn't here, because he would have been like, y'all are off the deep end. Let me tell you the philosophical implications for this nightmare hellscape that we all live in.
We'll have to get his report card after.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Future Commerce. You can find more episodes of this podcast and our new podcast. The second season of the Visions podcast is coming soon. You can get it at futurecommerce.com, and that is our audiovisual trends report. You can find more out about Visions, find out the 4 trends that are shaping the way that consumers buy and the culture that they create in commerce. You can find that at visions.futurecommerce.com, and we are in your inbox 3 times a week with insights that you need to shape your perspective on how consumers engage with your brands. If you're building a brand or you operate a brand, if you are in strategy or foresight, you need this kind of analysis. You can find it at futurecommerce.com/subscribe, and you'll be getting the best of our insights 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, straight from Future Commerce. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Future Commerce.